How do you detect that a person has esophageal cancer?
Whenever there is a patient, we do not only treat a tumor or cancer, but we treat the patient.
If somebody is consuming gutka, tobacco, or alcohol, all of these also contribute to this cancer?
Tobacco, when accompanied by, alcohol, it is not additive. It is multiplication of the risk. So when these factors are present, they increase the risk of getting cancer several folds high. Other kind of addiction also you should avoid. Stress, how much decrease you can do, that you should be doing. So whatever your body is saying, please listen to that, please respect that, and come into medical personnel's attention.
Hello, everyone. This is your host, Vidhi Jain, and I welcome you back to the Health Convo, the show that brings expert medical insights directly to you. Today, we are privileged to have with us Dr. Jyoti Bajpai, a globally acclaimed medical oncologist and a leading expert in precision oncology and immunotherapy. Dr. Bajpai has received advanced training from some of the world's most prestigious institutes, including AIMS New Delhi, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center New York, and Johns Hopkins University, USA. With over 2 decades of experience in oncology, she has also served as a professor at Tata Memorial Hospital, Mumbai, shaping the future of cancer care in India. She is currently heading the medical and precision oncology at Apollo Hospital, Mumbai, and overall Maharashtra. Also, the founder and president elect of Immuno-Oncology Society of India. Her expertise spans across treating common, rare, and highly complex cancers with a strong focus on precision medicine, immunotherapy, and personalized cancer care. Beyond clinical excellence, she is actively involved in international oncology guidelines and research, contributing to global advancements in cancer treatment. Dr. Bajpai is deeply committed to patient-centric approach and combining cutting-edge science with compassion, ensuring that every patient receives the most effective and individualized care possible. In today's episode, she will share her insights on future cancer treatment, the role of precision oncology, and how innovations in immunotherapy are transforming outcomes for patients worldwide. So, without any further ado, let's get started with her, with the leading voice of modern oncology, none other than Dr. Jyoti Bajpai. I welcome you, ma'am, to the Health Convo.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Ma'am, the very first question that comes to my mind when I say about esophageal cancer is, what are the symptoms? How do you detect that a person has esophageal cancer? And if a common person has to look out for these symptoms, what would that be?
So I think with the excellent question, I would say it is very, very relevant, and I would like to emphasize to everybody that generally esophageal cancers are detected late because they often whispers rather than alarm everyone. The symptoms are quite non-specific and subtle, especially to begin with, and that's where people tend to neglect it. For example, swallowing difficulty, that could be due to multiple reasons, but I would like to urge everyone that if this swallowing difficulty is persistent for 2 3 weeks, it's not waxing and waning, rather it is being progressive, it's blocking or choking, that kind of a sensation, or even the stickiness of food inside. These are alarming symptoms because generally esophageal is a luminal thing. It's kind of a flexible tube, and it gives initially quite a lot of, it is having a stretchability, so the symptom doesn't arise very early. So while these stickiness or blocking symptoms are appearing, one should really pay attention because it's actually little late even by then. Initially the swallowing difficulties for solids, and later it moves to even liquids, but till that time it is becoming really, really late. Also remember that if it is a blocking or a sticky sensation, do not misunderstand it that this is just plain acidity or reflux, because generally acidity burns and also it fluctuates. These are the symptoms, symptoms of cancer are persistent and rather progressive. So this is the difference.
Okay, so symptoms are something which are very common nowadays, like swallowing, chest pain, or acidity. So these symptoms, we usually see that Indian population usually have these symptoms even for a small disease as well. So how does a layman understand that this is something which will lead to more serious?
So again, important differential is that generally if there is a plain acidity or reflux, these things are often fluctuating, so they will not be constantly increasing or remain constant. They vary with the food habit, with the night sleep, etc., or stress. But if there is something persistent over the weeks, not getting away by any change in food habits or sleep, etc., then you should be really worry. Also, in some people where there's chronic acidity, it leads to a Barrett's esophagus. Again, there is a chances of over and above that, cancer development. So please, please remember, the persistence is very very important. 2-3 weeks there is just persistent of these kind of symptoms, and generally acid burns while this cancer, they blocks or they create a sticky sensation. Also, they are often accompanied by a hoarseness of voice. So it again, if it is a persistent hoarseness and or it is a progressive, because there can be a nerve entrapment or nerve involvement. Also weight loss, because essentially it's a food pipe. So if there is a sudden weight loss which is happening, for which you are not making an effort, so these things could be alarming.
So basically, throat discomfort, hoarse voice, these are the early signs that a person can detect.
Yes.
Apart from these signs, are there any other symptoms?
So as I said, weight loss, because generally cancer, especially in the little later stages, then it is accompanied by weight loss, appetite loss, systemic symptoms, not feeling okay. So all these symptoms should also brought somebody into notice that there can be something serious. So I think, when there are even subtle symptoms like your voice is little bit changing, but persistently it is growing. Similarly, these blocking symptoms of food getting sticky, food is not, you're not able to swallow properly, and this is persistent, you should not really ignore it.
Okay, amazing. Ma'am, but how early these symptoms can be understood, and how long does it takes for the person to understand that he or she has been detected by a cancer, and how long does the symptoms take to reflect in a person?
So as I said that initially, if there is a growth inside, because esophagus is a lumen and it is a tube, which is a tube kind of a thing which is flexible, stretchable. So very beginning people do not have symptoms. So that's why this is really really worrisome, and especially people who are not very vigilant, this can go often masked for many many months. In India, 70% of our patients, we detect them late. So that is the most worrisome thing, and the detection mortality is almost 1:1. So that is most worrisome, because we are detecting late. That's why we are not able to cure them completely. So that's where I urge that even when you're experiencing some symptoms and they are for more than 2 weeks, 3 weeks, please bring into attention, because by the time you are just developing symptom also, it's little late. So you should not be neglecting further. There may be a benign thing, there may not be a cancer, but then we can rule it out. But there may be a cancer also. So I would urge that if there is a persistent difficulty in swallowing and there is accompanied hoarseness also, and which is progressive, not going, please come into medical attention.
Amazing. Ma'am, the Indian household, we usually believe that सुबह सुबह एक गरम कड़क चाय होनी चाहिए. Then only our day will start, then only our routine will follow. So is this habit a worrisome habit, would lead to esophageal cancer? Should a person worry about this habit of Indian household? Or what all other food habits of Indian household that we should avoid to make sure that our life do not affect with cancer?
So very well said. I think you have given this as a flavor. So I would say that it is not that if you are just taking one cup of tea or one cup of coffee, it is really worrisome. But you should be concerned that it should not be, you should not be consuming it too hot. So we generally call it as a beverages, hot beverages like more than 65 degrees. So that is something, and if you are persistently, constantly consuming that kind of thing, some people are having a habit to take boiling hot, they say, right? So if those kind of things are persistent on a regular basis, then they can make somebody prone to develop certain things. Even the people who are having a chronic acidity, in them there is a condition called Barrett's esophagus, because of this chronic irritation due to that acid reflux also, there is a pre-cancerous thing which develop, and later on it can develop into cancer. And also the pickled food or very smoky food, in couple of our belts where these kind of cancers are very common, like West Bengal or like Northeast, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Kashmir Valley. In all those parts, there is at times there is too cold a weather, and that's where people, they adapt a lifestyle wherein they take very smoky food, pickle food, and very hot. So these things on persistent manner, they make somebody prone to develop such cancers. So one should practice moderation, one should practice a healthy lifestyle. I'm not saying that stop taking that one cup of tea or coffee which is kind of your lifeline, but you can consume it little less hot than what more than 65 is a dangerous thing.
Precaution is better than cure.
Absolutely. Precaution is better than cure, and moderation. Again, you should not go into extreme. I'm not saying completely stop hot things, only consume cold things. It's not that way. You can really moderate your lifestyle in a manner that you can enjoy things as well as you can protect yourself.
Amazing. So, ma'am, how if somebody is consuming gutka, tobacco, or alcohol, all of these also contribute to this cancer?
So very, very important. I would really want to, all of you, please have the attention on this, that tobacco in any form is hazardous, not only for this particular cancer, for many other cancers also. Be it head and neck, be it lung cancer, in some or the other form, this tobacco is involved. And tobacco, when accompanied by, alcohol, it is not additive. It is multiplication of the risk. So when these factors are present, they increase the risk of getting cancer several folds high. So these are definitely dangerous thing, and one should really avoid. In these belts, what I was just describing you in the West Bengal or this northeast, there is one thing is their food habits, another thing is these tobacco, gutka, alcohol. All these things are rampant. So these in a patient who's already prone and who's having her food habits of this kind, and then over and above these addiction, they all exponentially increase the risk, and that's why we are seeing such a high incidence in those belts.
True. Ma'am, if somebody already has a history of esophageal cancer in their family, so is there a chance that the next person or the next generation is also prone to that cancer? And how early should they get themselves detected for it?
So esophageal cancer is not often genetically associated. In some percentage maybe, but not very common like breast, ovary, etc. But if there is a familial association, that might be due to same environment sharing, those kind of things. So definitely, but for whatever reasons, if there is a familial incidence, we ask people to come forward for a screening, and especially if they have this kind of food habits, some other addictions, etc. are present which make them high risk, we ask them to come forward for screening, detect early so that we can really cure them.
Is there a certain age group that should be more concerned about this cancer, or is it very common in all sort of age groups?
So risk varies depending upon the exposure, but generally the middle-aged or elderly people, this is more common. And also it depends upon what kind of belt you belong to, and what kind of risk behavior you're practicing.
Okay. Ma'am, as you mentioned that acidity is one of the very common symptoms that we face in such kind of a cancer. GRED is in this concept.
So, I would say that persistent acid reflux is a known, a risk factor, and especially over the years, if this kind of acidity and reflux it is not really treated, then it can leads to a change in the esophagus, inside, mucosa, and it turns out to be a Barrett's esophagus, which is a pre-cancerous condition, and it can definitely increase the risk to several folds of developing cancer. So acidity unattended is really a risk factor. One should really treat it well and also prevent it, because many times this is also lifestyle related things, inadequate sleep, erratic sleep patterns, the food habits. These days we are really seeing a trend towards where too much of junk food, too much of oily spicy food, and people are really especially the youngsters, they're going away from the healthy food like fruit, vegetables, or those sorts of things. They're consuming more and more junk food, aerated drinks, alcohol, smoking. All these could be high risk behavior, so these should be avoided, and they in turn leads to acidity in turn leads to Barrett's, and then make them more prone. So this is all a vicious cycle. So I think one should really adopt a healthy lifestyle, healthy routine, and avoid stress as much as possible. I know that this is a very competent world. So stress cannot be avoided completely. But again, I would say moderation. Perhaps moderation is the key. And there are certain factors which are certainly modifiable. For example, your alcohol, your tobacco, or your gutka intake, you can definitely modify. You can definitely modify that very high temperature of food you can avoid. And so I think awareness is the key. And I'm glad that you are arranging such a podcast so that people can get the right kind of messages. And these are simple things which can, if they adapt in their lifestyle, we can really prevent a large majority of the cases.
Absolutely. So I feel up till now our audience is well aware of what all are the symptoms of this kind of a cancer and what are the early signs of detection, what kind of food habits they should avoid, what kind of lifestyle changes that they should make. But when it comes to treatment, ma'am, what are the options that one can go forward with?
So again, this is also a very very important thing. And also I would like to say that this is stage dependent. So in what stage you are detecting, it also dictates our treatment lines. So if we can detect really early, then we can do a surgery which is surgical resection. And that helps a lot. But if you're detecting at late stages, chemotherapy, radiation, etc. come into picture. And even in very late stages also, systemic therapy are still doing quite a lot. And also I want to put a strong word that today is a precision oncology era. So if we can detect early, local modalities like surgery, radiation can be of lot of use. And again, in this space also systemic therapy is creeping in. But if late or very late metastatic, then also don't dishearten, because better late than never, I would say. Today is a precision oncology era, and we do biomarker testing in our patients. In tumor tissues, if we find some good biomarkers, then we can really offer them appropriate therapies. And there is a HER2, which is a marker. There is anti-HER2 therapies, targeted therapies which are available, and we can use them. Similarly, immunotherapies come in a big way in these kind of cancers, and especially if they are PD-L1 positive, they do better. So biomarker driven targeted and immunotherapy has changed the fate of these cancers. Again, please remember, nothing is panacea, and we have to be very selective in our clinics to decide which one to for what. And also, whenever we are using such therapies, we have to be very very careful about their side effects, about other management aspect. So in expert hands and the hospital where all the infrastructure is available, perhaps we can treat a large majority of cases. We may cure early cases, but we always can comfort in all the stages. So that is most important, and one should not forget.
Absolutely. Ma'am, given to your expertise, you have a amazing of more than 2 decades of experience. You're a president-elect. So can you tell us what all are the options apart from surgery and chemotherapy?
So I think very relevant question, and thank you for bringing this that about the Immuno-Oncology Society of India. So this is something really close to my heart. So I founded this society with an interest group, and I'm currently the president-elect for this. And I really believe in the power of immuno-oncology. And I believe that this is one modality. This is kind of fifth modality. So apart from surgery, radiation oncology, chemotherapy, targeted therapy, the immunotherapy has, which is the fifth modality of care, has come in a big way. And I believe this is not only the revolution of the decade, but the revolution of the century. And you all would recall that Professor Jim Allison, Professor Hanso got a Nobel Prize for immunotherapy path discovery, checkpoint inhibitors, which has paved a way for many deadly cancers cure. So I would like to say that in this cancer also there is lot of role of immunotherapy, and that is kind of changing the fate of these kind of deadly cancers.
Amazing. Ma'am, but if somebody has or is ongoing the cancer surgery, the treatment is ongoing, how long does it take a person to recover from it?
So again, it depends upon that what stage we have detected the cancer, what kind of modalities are being used, whether we require multi-modality care or whether we require single modality or two modalities. Everything, nothing is holy water in this world. So whenever we treat, every treatment which is effective on the cancer will be having some kind of side effects. So, and the body, get time to recover with that stress. But and also it depends upon what is the pre-reserve of that particular patient. Lot of time the people who develop this cancer are nutritionally deprived, also nutritionally poor. So that compound the issue. So the recovery get delayed when there is a nutritional deficiencies. I'm a proponent of enhanced supportive care in all my cancer patients, and especially in these advanced variety of cancer, and especially when there's food pipe, the esophagus itself is impacted, the food and nutrition get really affected. So we need to provide them targeted nutrition. So we test for their nutritional deficiencies and provide them targeted support, which is very, very crucial. So remember that, during entire treatment, they need to match their calorie and protein intake, which is very, very vital, and that is the nothing less than the proper oncology treatment. So oncology definitive treatment as well as supportive care together makes this kind of treatment successful.
So, as you mentioned about targeted therapy, who all can access targeted therapy or immunotherapy in India, and what all options are there beyond chemotherapy?
So very important, again, as I said, that this is essentially a precision oncology domain. So we test for biomarkers, and when we find some target or some receptors, for example, HER2 is one of the marker. So in 10 to 20% of patients, we can find this HER2 as a marker. Now, if this HER2 is present, there is a very good targeted therapy which is available, and we can provide these patients that targeted therapy. However, if that HER2 as a marker is not there, then we cannot, that will not work. So we need to find first the biomarker in the tumor tissues, and then we appropriately target. Similarly, if there is a marker which suggests potential responsiveness for immunotherapy, we can offer them that kind of immunotherapy. Now, so of course the access is variable. India is a very heterogeneous country, and I was in Tata Memorial Center for almost 2 decades, and I really have seen world from both the ends. And at one spectrum, the people who come to you and they say that I can afford everything under the sun, perhaps the sun even. But at another side, there is a lot of challenges, right? So when we say precision medicine or individualized therapy, we have to be judicious about their needs. And economics is also a science. So we have to be very, very cognizant in the clinics that what this person can afford and what this person can sustain, what kind of social support is available, what kind of insurance is available. Everything matters. So we need to really see that what is the cost of therapy, what are the other factors, and whether this therapy can be completed in this patient. Fortunately, these days there is a good amount of people who are insured. There are good amount of government schemes also which are there, and there are many, many supports which are available for the patient. So I again want to tell this to every patient that please search, please come together, please find out that what are the options available. Don't dishearten. There are many options which can be executed, and also there is availability of generic drugs. So previously the original molecules, they used to be really expensive. Now with the generic molecules availability, like for immunotherapy or for targeted therapy for that matter, the access has really become increased. I will give you a simple example. For breast cancer patient, when I was in Tata Memorial many years early, that time a fraction of patients could only afford an anti-HER2 targeted therapy, which is kind of life-saving in them. But later, with the advent of generics, biosimilars, large majority of the patients are able to afford it. So that is the beauty. We need to concentrate that how can we increase access. We need to find our own problems and our own solutions. And I want to congratulate our own, pharmaceutical companies and research wings who are really making an effort and research and development. And we are coming out with molecules which are world-class comparable.
Amazing. But when it comes to economics, how much would it cost for a person to go for a cancer treatment for such kind of a cancer?
So again, as I said, that there is no one answer to that. Treatment is again a spectrum. You can get, and also it is biomarker driven. So no one size fit all model is really true. What kind of biomarkers we will see, what stage you are presenting, what is your other body reserves, and where you are taking a treatment. So this all decides, your care. So I would say that, depending upon the needs at different scenarios, there is a tailor-made treatment which is made feasible. So no patient should feel that they will not be able to get anything. Okay, they may not be able to get the highest variety of treatment, but the essential treatment, minimum treatment, they should be able to get majority of them. So I'm a part of guidelines, international guidelines, and I represent country for many guidelines. So I would say that when we make guidelines, also we take into account that what are the essential things, essential or minimal things, so that if there is a resource limitation, that at least this should be done. And what is the optimal thing? So when everything is available, these are the guidelines. So we tailor made the guidelines, we triage, and so that we can guide the community practitioners or other people also, that at least when even there is a resource limitation, this much should be done.
Okay. So as amazingly you mentioned that one size cannot fit all. So one treatment is something which won't fit each and every person, and it depends upon the stages, depends upon the type of cancer that they're dealing with. But there is a treatment for each and every person out there. But ma'am, when we deep dive into it, what are the different stages and what are the symptoms in these stages and what are the detections that they happen in these stages?
So I would say that, to begin with, generally in esophagus, the symptoms start because, symptoms start in the form of that they are having a feeling of choking, stickiness, and swallowing difficulty. Initially, it is for the solids, and gradually, if they keep on neglecting, it comes for the liquids also. And generally, our patients, they present at that stage when even liquids are getting a problem. So you can understand that the mass is really grown. Then they're finding it difficult to even liquid swallowing. So these are the initial symptom from solids, swallowing difficulty, to liquids, and also the hoarseness accompanies when the nerve entrapment is there, nerve involvement is there. So when somebody is having a problem in swallowing liquids, and also the hoarseness is developed, and because of this decrease in intake and decrease swallowing difficulty, and also it accompanied systemic signs and symptoms, people lose weight. So in very fast, in couple of months, they have several kgs weight loss. So these are different spectrum from very early, when there is just some swallowing difficulty of solid, so they just feel there is something stickiness in the throat, and I feel discomfort, and they come forward. Some very aware patient do that, but they are very small fraction, while a majority of them, they fall into the category that when there is even problem of getting liquids in, and they are starting having weight loss, which is really prominent, people are telling them what happened to you. So, and hoarseness, persistent hoarseness, which is difficulty in communicating and all. So these are the early and late symptoms. Endoscopy is the minimum investigation. We need to endoscope, we need to really see what is there, and then we find a growth, and then we stage, we do PET CT scans, other parameters, and then we test for organ functions, that what kind of treatment this particular person is able to tolerate. So with all these things, so first we make a diagnosis. Histopathology is the key. So we do endoscopy, then we do a biopsy, we do a biopsy confirmation, and we do biomarker testing these days, precision oncology era, as I said, staging workup, staging whether it is a early disease, locally advanced, or metastatic or advanced disease. Depending upon that, we really tailor-made a treatment, and then we execute that.
Okay, so it's amazing that if people come forward in the stage 1 itself, the detection is pretty easy. The treatment is very easy, and it is basically a life-saving thing for the people.
Absolutely. The statistics, the survival statistics really vary, that if you are detecting in stage 1 versus 4, more than 80% to less than 20%.
Okay.
So it is a drastic difference. Do not neglect your symptoms. Please come forward. If you are getting these kind of symptoms, you really need to get under a scope, rather than just doing a self-medication, or especially going to quacks and treating for acidity. Little bit variation in the initial phase, you get some kind of relief, but later, it just become persistent.
As we all know that esophageal cancer is something that would affect the person physically. But what kind of effect does it happen when it comes to their mental and emotional state? Does family play a very important role in this? And what are the options beyond family support that are available in India?
So I think extremely important question, and this kind of holistically cover, because again, I want to emphasize that whenever there is a patient, we do not only treat a tumor or cancer, but we treat the patient. And the holistic care is very important. And when I say holistic care, the emotional well-being, the coping mechanisms take a very important role. I'm a proponent for enhanced supportive care, and when I say this, it means that how much is the definitive oncology related treatment is important, like chemo, radiation oncology, surgery, or immunotherapy, targeted therapy. In similar way, a supportive care segment is very, very important. And when I say supportive care, the mental support is, plays a very important role. And I'm really fortunate that I've treated thousands of patients while I was in Tata Memorial for almost 2 decades, and before that in All India Institute or a couple of other exposures at abroad, and now in Apollo. So I have seen lots and lots of patients, and I really can see that the patient with an optimism, a positive attitude, a good family or friends support, they often have that kind of positivity which keeps them going, keeps them fighting, and that make a difference. And I have seen with the similar kind of disease, the similar kind of stage, similar kind of treatment, also if there are two patients, one with positive attitude, one with negative attitude, the positive did really well, and even cope well, tolerate well, the less toxicity and ultimate outcomes becomes better. So I really urge to all my patients that accept in mind, develop that positive attitude, have faith, and with all of these support measures, keep going. So I always say everybody that glass is either half empty or half filled, and my glass is never half emptied, and that expectation I build with my patients and the family. In India, we are really fortunate that this family support system is really robust, and the family friends, they come together in such kind of vulnerable moment, and they support a patient, which is very, very helpful. Apart from that, NGOs, they play a very, very important role. There are many NGOs which are there, and there is information which is available now. There is a with the advent of possibility of net, if my people can check this online, and they can get to correct people. There is, even if there is some funds requirement, there is many online support system for that also. There is crowdfunding and other measures. People are very aware, and they want to support such causes. That is very, very important. There's a lot of philanthropy also. There is many government schemes which are available. Ayushman Bharat, I really want to tell, even for the less privileged, there is nothing like that you cannot be treated. So there is a tailor-made treatment which can be made feasible by all these means. So one need to really see what is available and where they are fitting into. And again, family, friends support is very important, because that moment patient may not be able to explore all these, but other people can. As a very important part of society, I think it's a collective responsibility. You really need entire village to raise a child, and similarly, I believe that you really need entire village or country to support a cancer patient. So we need to make those kind of programs wherein we can increase access. We should support our own research and development, so that our own drugs come into market which are much more accessible. And industry, academia responsibility, along with government, along with NGOs, families, there is a collective responsibility. And if we can really take that, we can make a real progress.
I really like the line that you mentioned, that it really takes a village or a city to make sure that the cancer patient survives. Not just physically, but the emotional and the mental health is really important in this kind of a situation. And a little motivation and a little push from your loved ones can take them to a long way. Absolutely amazing, ma'am. And as you mentioned, that we have multiple NGOs, multiple government schemes that can help the one who are in need. So it doesn't make sense that if you say that the economic doesn't support, but then there are options you can look out for. Can you also put some light on precision oncology? How does that help in this kind of situation?
So again, very important. And I would say that today is a precision oncology era, and one size fit all model is definitely not true. When we begin cancer therapies, it was like one size fit all model. So for example, one breast cancer or one esophageal cancer, and in spite of having many different patients, different characteristics, we are kind of treating everybody with a similar kind of therapies. But with that kind of a histology driven approach, meaning what diagnosis says, we just going blanket treatment towards that, there are chances that somebody may respond beautifully, while somebody may just not respond at all, or somebody respond in between. And there will be varied pattern of side effects also, depending upon their own milieu. So now we have really moved from that approach. Then we have taken a stride. We were giving a biomarker driven approaches, and now we are even more advanced. We are in a genomic era. We are doing sequencing. That means we are really dissecting out tumors at micro level, at molecular level. We are seeing what kind of pathways, what kind of receptors, what kind of mechanisms are working, and how can we best target them, and there are many tameable targets, and there are very efficient drugs which are available. We can even know that what could be the potential toxicities, and when we really work around that, this is all precision oncology is. And when we give that kind of tailor-made treatment to a patient, there are very high chances that they will get the most efficacious treatment, most efficacious result, while similar time we can minimize toxicities. Also, I would like to add that when I say personalized medicine or precision medicine, my thing is not alone to do genomic analysis and doing these pathway driven therapies. This is a very important part. But apart from that, I also look into that what is the age of my patient. For example, more than 60 years, what we call geriatric or elderly patients, they are having multiple comorbid conditions like diabetes, blood pressure, cardiac problems. They are on polypill therapies. So there are chances that they may not tolerate the same therapy what a young patient will tolerate. So we make a very different plan for them. Similarly, a young patient, they are having their pregnancy, their fertility, body image needs. We need to cater to everything. I rather brought a scalp cooling device in country by my randomized trial, which can preserve the hair loss when patients taking chemotherapy, and that helps in motivating them tremendously. Similar time, we added one drug in our chemotherapy armamentarium, olanzapine, one small drug, which leads to tremendously good control of vomiting, and same time the daytime sleepiness can also be controlled if we are using that tailor-made dose. These kind of therapies have changed guidelines. These are in the international guidelines, and I'm very humbled to say that I am country representative for advanced breast cancer guidelines, Society of Immunotherapy guidelines, various ESMO guidelines for sarcoma and other therapies, gynecology. So these international forums and put together patient's perspective first make us understand that what is best for our patient and how can we really precisely choose and treat. Similarly, even gender medicine, for a similar kind of tumor, male and female, they can behave differently. The drug metabolism is different. So I would say all these factors are important for precision oncology, because it is most important that who's sitting across and share with you, and we need to consider every aspect, including the economics. And then we should make a precise, concise plan for suiting to their needs.
Absolutely amazing, ma'am, that what you have mentioned. If I look back 10 years back, there was a very less knowledge about cancer, very less guidelines, very less regulations that we knew as a layman. But given to experts like you who bring in such international guidelines, international regulations, and international drugs to the Indian market, given to that reason, now the cancer treatment is super advanced, and I feel that it would even get more advanced in the coming future. That was really amazing, ma'am. Ma'am, as an expert, what kind of lifestyle changes do you think a layman should adopt? What kind of eating habits he or she should change, even before getting detected with esophageal cancer, or also to someone who is already detected with it? What kind of changes they should make to avoid the cancer in the first place? And if they are being detected, how they can make sure that it doesn't go beyond that?
So I think very important again, and I think lifestyle modification is very relevant. It is not only important to prevent cancer, but to prevent many other diseases also. So I believe that one important line is practice moderation. We should not be at extremes. We should not be at extremes whenever there's anything. I would say anything and everything. Some people come, they completely left sugar, completely left oil, ghee. So I'm not advocate of that. I would say that you can be in moderation. You can consume things, but in a little amount. So in nutshell, I would say that I advise all my patients and other normal people also that your food plate should be as colored as possible. Add their greens, add their yellows, add their reds. So how much fruits and vegetable you can add, you will really doing a justice to yourself, because these fruit and vegetables are rich source of antioxidants, and they can prevent many lifestyle related diseases including cancer. So that is very, very important. Then you can similar time avoid too much of junk food, too much of aerated drinks. Alcohol, tobacco is a big no. So tobacco in any form is hazardous. You must not. Alcohol occasionally is fine, social drinking, but not too much. And other kind of addiction also you should avoid. Stress, how much decrease you can do, that you should be doing. You should adopt a good sleep pattern, adopt yoga, some kind of exercise, a moderate exercise 3 times a week, even if it is a walking, swimming, something. I'm not saying that you have to do a vigorous exercise, but some kind of exercise 3 times a week is really helpful. So if you can take into account these small measures and also be cautious about you, I would urge that do not neglect your symptoms. This is also a lifestyle. This lifestyle change is probably a big way to go. So whatever your body is saying, please listen to that, please respect that, and come into medical person's attention, so that we can really detect early, and when we detect early, we can save lives. So I believe that awareness, putting attention, not neglecting, and then choosing and acting precisely outsmart cancer cells, and that is the way forward.
Amazing. In a nutshell, make sure that you do not have a sedentary lifestyle. You keep moving, be it in any form. Make sure that what you're eating, what is in your plate, is very mindful. And other than that, your body is your biggest mirror. So if your body is showing any signs, any symptoms, do not neglect them. Look into it, get expert help. And thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. I really hope that the audience have now a clear understanding of esophageal cancer, how to detect it, what kind of treatments are available in India, what kind of expert help that they can get. So thank you so much, Dr. Jyoti. It was really wonderful having you over here. एंड अगर आप लोगों को भी इस एपिसोड से कुछ सीखने मिला हो या कुछ समझ आया हो, देन मेक श्योर कि आप ये अपने फ्रेंड्स और फैमिली के साथ शेयर करो, क्योंकि शायद आपके एक शेयर से कुछ जिंदगियां बच सकती है. थैंक यू सो मच एवरीवन.
थैंक यू वेरी मच. और जैसे इन्होंने बोला कि हमारी ये कलेक्टिव रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी है, अवेयरनेस आप तक सीमित नहीं रहना चाहिए, ये सबको स्प्रेड होना चाहिए, जिसमें हम कई जिंदगियां बचा सकें. थैंक यू वेरी मच.
This is it with the Health Convo podcast. See you in the next episode.